Jeeyoung Ahn Ha is the Treasurer's Office Asian Pacific American Heritage Month awardee for outstanding commitment in education. She's the director of the Korean Language Program and director of undergraduate studies in the Department of East Asian Languages and Cultures at the University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign. She has taught all levels of Korean language courses for over 20 years and is a co-author of textbooks and workbooks for heritage learners. She previously served as the American Association of Teachers of Korean Executive Board member, the Heritage Level Leader in the AATK Standards-Based Curriculum Project, and currently serves as the Secretary of Korean Special Interest Group in the American Council on the Teaching of Foreign Languages. She serves as an advisory board member for the Korean Language and Culture School and a faculty advisor for the Korean Student Association and the Korean Cultural Center in her local community. Jeeyoung has organized numerous events for language learners, instructors, and community volunteers to collaborate with one another and build a stronger community through understanding and learning of the Korean language and culture. In recognition of her particularly noteworthy efforts in advancing the mission of the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences, Jeeyoung received the 2021-22 LAS Academic Professional Award in March of this year. So Jeeyoung, congratulations for receiving this honor, and thank you for joining me.
Well, first of all, thank you very much, Mr. Treasurer, for your introduction and also for giving me this opportunity to be here today. Action research is called a classroom-based research, or I should stop here. You didn't ask me a question, did you?
No, just welcome here. But maybe you can go into that about action research. You know, you've made a career out of education and you've been a leader in this field. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yes, actually it's called classroom-based research because teachers like me connect research to their practice by observing or gathering data about their own class through interviews, case studies, or questionnaires. In my case, I feel the need to investigate my practices when I want to understand how I can improve my classroom in meaningful and sustainable ways. I'd like to talk about 3 topics that I explored as a classroom researcher. These topics were not only critical to the improvement of the curriculum design and instructional strategies, but also promoted a deeper understanding of classroom teaching and just life in general. The first type of practitioner research that I'd like to talk about is exploratory practice, which I did in 2010 with my colleagues from the German, Japanese, and Swahili language programs here at U of I. Exploratory practice, or EP, is a framework for reflective teaching and is meant to support ongoing teacher reflection without leading to teacher burnout. We each identified a question or a puzzle in our own classroom that we wanted to understand better, and then we learned how to use existing resources in the community to address those issues. The question that I wanted to explore with EP was on how to engage shy and inactive students in a smaller classroom. Through EP, I learned that I just need to be myself during my language instruction. I need to understand my students better as individuals rather than just looking at them as learners of the language. In other words, I learned to share my side of the story so that students can feel connected to me as a person and start communicating their real stories in the language that they are learning. The second topic I looked at was to make meaningful connections between classroom teaching and actual assessment of students' learning. Integrated Performance Assessment, or IPA, was the perfect framework for that connection because it evaluates how students use the language in 3 different communication types. Most importantly, it's something we do with students rather than to them. I also had to think of ways to prepare students for that and decided to incorporate that assessment into intermediate and advanced classes. The responses I got from students through the survey and in-class evaluations was quite encouraging. They liked that they were exposed to real-life assessment content and enjoyed engaging in topics that were relevant to their daily life. And because expectations were clearly explained from the very beginning, they didn't have any trouble going through the process. Fortunately, I did this action research in 2017, a few years before the pandemic, and it's been extremely successful in the context of remote teaching, especially because I needed alternatives to paper and pencil exams. While implementing this new assessment, I came across the last question, which was on providing students with effective and meaningful feedback that they want to work on. I want it to come from a place of understanding as a student instead of me simply pointing out corrections as a teacher. I also wanted the students to be in charge more than I am as an active learner with ownership to their learning. So I decided on a system of peer review. We all know it's easier to find a sense of understanding and comfort from people at your own level of learning. So I wanted my students to feel that. Through peer review, students can not only give active feedback to their classmates, but they can also reflect and come to realizations about their own work. My intermediate and advanced classes now regularly learn from each other while reviewing each other's work. And according to the student survey, they also like that they are exposed to different perspectives and various writing styles. They get to learn how to give constructive and respectful feedback while taking charge as an active learner instead of a passive one. And even today, I'm still trying to improve that component by regularly checking in with my students during class evaluations. So these three topics guided and allowed me to make an informed decision about how to design or develop the curriculum and what to emphasize in teacher training, especially in terms of instructional strategies.
So, Jeeyoung, I like learning languages, and people will say things like, "What language are you fluent in?" And I think that means different things to different people. So, when you are testing or placing people, how are proficiency and online placement tests helping to assess students who are learning Korean language? And what does that process look like? What does fluency or competency or proficiency mean to you?
Mm. It's true that some students can evaluate themselves quite accurately when it comes to their language proficiency and place themselves into the right level. But many of them tend to actually underestimate their proficiency. Language courses are not like other content courses where students can just dive into the learning without any prerequisite or background knowledge. Unless it's the very first Korean language class that they take, it's essential that they are placed into the right level to ensure an adequately challenging and optimal learning environment. The current test is designed to assess all aspects of students' Korean proficiency, listening, speaking, reading, and writing, as effectively and as efficiently as possible. At UIUC, our campus has one of the largest Korean student groups in the US, and due to the pedagogical need to accurately assess those and practical constraints with a large student demographic, Title VI funding aided the development of the current online placement/proficiency test back in 2010. This test serves dual purposes of testing for placement and for proficiency assessment. If student wants to take a Korean language class, like you do, I'm sure, the test can help recommend an appropriate course based on prior knowledge. If a student is already fluent in Korean and earns a sufficiently high score, the test allows them to fulfill the foreign language requirement for graduation without taking language courses. Currently, the UIUC test is administered on the last Friday before the first day of instruction each semester, which makes sense. And it's a 2-hour semi-adaptive computerized test administered on Canvas where the score of the previous part will determine whether one is allowed to continue into the next one. Now, placement is determined not by looking at just one factor, but looking at multiple factors such as the total score and the quality of his or her answers from speaking and writing. Placement of heritage learners can be tricky because some of them have higher oral proficiency than literacy skills such as reading and writing. So in those areas, in those cases, it's even more important to assess their proficiency holistically. A high level of oral proficiency may not get you into the intermediate level even if you don't know how to read and write. Those emphasis on literacy skills and students' prior knowledge of the target culture is especially important in heritage language instruction, which is why I developed a curriculum that utilizes students' prior knowledge and focuses on areas of needs and interests. I'm proud to say that our Korean program is one of the few Korean language programs in the States that provide 2 different tracks throughout the year for heritage and non-heritage learners of Korean.
Okay. Well, Jeeyoung, you obviously have put a lot of time and effort, made a career out of this. If there are young people watching here today who say, I really love languages or I love education, What advice do you give young people looking to pursue a career in education or language education?
Uh, it's always a difficult question, but an important question to answer, I believe. Two things immediately come to my mind. First is to give your all, no matter how little or irrelevant your task may seem at the moment. It may sound like a cliche, but that's been my life motto, and I believe it has really paid off. In my opinion, there's a significant difference between keeping a work-life balance and doing the bare minimum of what's asked of you. I'd actually like to share an anecdote, which is about an incident that literally changed my career. At the time, I was asked to review a draft of the Korean National Standards project report, which I wasn't even part of, but I did my best anyway. Afterwards, to my surprise, I was invited to present at an annual conference as a reviewer representative for that national standards project because I was the one who reviewed the draft most thoroughly. Later, I found out that I had been asked to review the draft because a colleague of mine had recommended me to the project leader after he attended a small workshop that I co-organized and was impressed with the quality of my work. That seemingly insignificant task presented me with the opportunity to connect with my dear colleagues in the present and eventually led me to where I am today. I also want to emphasize that you have to do your own part in actively seeking networking and professional development opportunities. For the first few years in my position, I worked alone, not recognizing the importance of networking or collaboration. And those years were challenging, to no surprise. I learned my lesson the hard way, but I want others to really proactive in engaging with their colleagues early on. I also want to encourage seeking out trends and news in education, whether it's on technology or self-care, especially during this unprecedented era for education. There's a Korean saying, 백직장도 맞들면 낫다. The literal translation is that it's better to lift together, even if it's just a blank sheet of paper. And it means that no matter what the job is, it's always easier when you work together. We can all benefit from the successes, challenges, and not so positive experiences of our colleagues and peers in the education community. Through networking and collaboration, you'll be encouraged to examine your own assumptions about classroom learning and hopefully rediscover your passion for teaching. It's about realizing actually you are not alone and that others are also in your shoes. If we allow ourselves to work together, we can also move forward together, which have been the most rewarding part of my work. Thank you very much.
Well, I think that's good advice for someone to get a career in education or in foreign languages, but it's good advice for anyone in life. We don't accomplish anything by ourselves. We accomplish more working together. But that's why Jeeyoung Ahn Ha is the Treasurer's Office Asian Pacific American Heritage Month awardee for outstanding commitment in education. I think you can see that in this interview. If you'd like to learn more, please seek her out. But Jeeyoung, thank you very much for taking this time here today and congratulations.
Thank you very much.